Hey everybody, how you doing? Welcome back. Here we are. This lecture will deal more with the nitty-gritty elements of writing, and I mean we've already covered a lot of what this actually may be a little bit redundant. Some of the things we're going to talk about today, but just some more specifics about how things should be constructed and how to treat certain things like sourcing information. Um, you all should have gotten back. Obviously, I mean, it's been about a week now, but I should have gotten back your profile assignments. Most of them were actually very good, and I appreciate that. I was actually quite pleased with what I saw. Um, and of course, the rewrites we do. I'm taping this over the weekends. So the rewrites will be due on Monday at the end of the day. Um, so yeah, I mean, if anybody has any questions, one thing I wanted to kind of really like be emphatic about, and I only had one person actually ask for this, but really like if you feel like you have any questions or anything like that, you need to talk about things, office hours, please, let's Zoom. All right. I was actually a little surprised I didn't hear from more people, but that's fine. But maybe I'll have an opportunity on the rewrite if you want to do that. You have any questions about that? So, and of course, we have our second assignment that's due also on Monday, end of the day. And don't forget, let me actually just stare at the screen here. All right. This is just stuff. All right. We have the worksheets. Again, I would like you to do this, not headlines, leads. Okay. You look at like the different components, different like pieces of information they provide for you. Try to pick something in here, like one part of it that maybe like resonate with people and turn it into a regular sentence that would serve as the first sentence or paragraph of a story. Do not do like a multi-sentence, just one sentence. That's it. The lead is almost always just one sentence. That's it. Okay. You know, this one you could choose between, what matters to people. Is it the rise from 2.5 to 2.7 million for child abuse cases? Or is it that the survey 3 to 4 children die every day? What resonates with people? Numbers matter, that sort of thing. Okay. Attempted murder. Is it just an attempted murder or something more beyond it? Maybe people should know that makes it unique. Okay. So again, you have 5 of them for the first part and 7 of them for the second part. Microsoft Word document, please apply that to the second assignment entry that's there. And you will actually have a rewrite on this too, that I will post very soon. Okay. So remember that. Okay. So let's go to the stories that were done. I just want to provide an example of a story that I thought worked well. Again, just linear focus here on the on the topic and the theme. We have a story about Christian de Guzman. And what's interesting about this story, I thought, was that right here, actually, I was talking to this student, and he was basically saying, like, he was complaining about the fact that this Christian de Guzman was doing this Rutgers Esports League of Legends team, and he was complaining about the fact that I didn't like the idea that he was just that he wanted to focus the story on the losing streak he had while on this Legends team. I said no because that's just too specific, and it would just the details of that just matter to people who are on the Legends team. You really got to think about your audience. I mean, there's this thing in media ethics where they talk about having a social contract with your audience, and basically something along the lines of like, you want to like appeal to your audience and basically inform them and understand who they are. Now, there's certain audiences that like a Fox News is a conservative audience, and you can argue a lot of the stuff they do is not correct, it's false, a sort of thing. But they do maybe like find information stories that maybe conservative people would like to see, and that are factual. So that's like a contract they have with their audience. I mean, your audience you would think about would be probably like maybe like Rutgers students, but not just that, but maybe like Rutgers faculty. So you're gonna have like students, you're gonna have students, and you're gonna have older people my age that might be interested in the story, maybe know something a little bit more about their students. Maybe parents might read this, see what's going on here. People are not just drinking here, okay? And that they're having some fun with this kind of game that my son would be into, my middle son, a Legends team. But you want to expand it out so maybe it's a story that maybe everybody can understand, that maybe everybody can relate to. So like the specifics of this would maybe for 55-year-old like me be like, what? But the difficulty of balancing the gaming passion and academic responsibilities that we get. That's something everybody would get. Everybody in the Rutgers community would get. Okay. Something that basically everybody can relate to. And there's also a lot of students who probably don't even know what this is. So it would appeal to those students too. Okay. It's about his difficulty in balancing the gaming passion and academic responsibilities. Basically talks about how he's introduced to this in 4 years ago, sorry, but it sparked a passion in him that basically has caused a love of gaming. So we're doing, why does he do it? What does he do it? What does he do? He does it every day. His passion of the game is evidence because he's immersed in this virtual world. But again, kind of balancing the game is still a challenge because he basically becomes an obstacle for his academic work. It's all a linear line. Everything is about who, what, where. Why is this a challenge? Why is this a challenge? The 12, he played it. He played longest time frame he played was 12 or 13 hours during quarantine. Oh my god, that'll lower your grade. And and then basically he goes on like that, but he loves us so much. And then of course the hardships he's done with, the challenges he's dealing with, that's when the losing streak comes in. That's where we get a little bit, be a little more specific. It made him left him feeling aggravated, that sort of thing. So that's more about the game, more about the obstacles, more about what's getting in the way of his academic work, his peacefulness at Rutgers, that sort of thing. Okay. And then more about him playing the game and what he does, but what he likes doing and why he wants to keep doing it. It's all about him and the game and how he balances, all on a straight line. I saw some stories where maybe we kind of like went off in different directions. Maybe like we started talking about what the person's majoring in, what the person did in high school. Does that have anything to do with this game? No. So basically you want to stay on one path, one straight path. If the major or anything like that, I mean, it could be mentioned as a secondary thing, like the Guzman who majors in blah blah blah, but then you return to the theme. Okay. That's like secondary information that can be inserted in the story, and that's it. Okay. Okay, so again, let's just go to the assignments. Okay, again, just to see what's due. I like to again put this in the student for you. By the way, just as kind of like I always suggest that like when you do the student view, that you put it in I should say like the show by type, okay? And then you can see what we got going on here. Now, again, I haven't actually posted the rewrite for this yet, but I will. And then of course the rewrite for this due February 6th for this. Okay, this was due last week. Okay, but of course we have the reading assignments that are due. Okay, and I'm going to talk about chapters 10 and 11. And then next we're going to read chapters 3 and 4. Okay, for next week. All right. Chapters 10 and 11 deal with like essentially like quotations and attribution. Okay. So basically, the information you get for a news story, usually and almost like 9 times out of 10, maybe lower than that, comes from a person. Okay. And, honestly, I mean, I showed you the Titanic story, and that essentially was basically taking what somebody was saying off Morse code, probably, and just slapping on the page. Well, that's not how we write. I like to say that we like to take information from people and make it a story, a narrative, something that's readable. And you've already seen me, some of you have seen me say this already. I basically like, I'm not a fan of long quotes. Direct quotes are like anything that's basically has like two, quotation marks on either side of it. Okay. And you should be used really like sparingly in a news story. Okay. They should show emotion, a quippy, like, oh my God, or like, I can't believe that happened, or something like that. They humanize the story and they're good for a story, but you really should write the story. You really need to write the story mostly in your own writing and paraphrasing. You'll see me say that over and over again, I guess. You know, basically, when you have a story, as a quote, when I say something when there was like a quote that something saying something like, I have a feeling that I will do well this semester because I'm working harder and applying myself, he said. Okay. I mean, that's not really much of a quote. I mean, if that's all you got, it's all you got, but it's flat. Okay. I mean, if you continue to say something like, uh, it's about time, it's kind of colorful, that sort of thing. Maybe this would be the quote you would use as a direct quote. And a lot of times people actually even like skip over quotes. Oh my gosh, I'm sorry. I actually was not sharing the screen at the time. Okay, sorry about that. So anyway, I have a feeling, blah, 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 that I will do well this semester because I'm working harder. He said it's about time. So this part of it is really kind of flat, but this part right here is actually like maybe colorful. So you want to like only really put like this kind of highlights, usually these quotation marks highlights something that's interesting or colorful to be said. And that draws attention for the reader to read it. But if they see something that's kind of long and flat, they'll probably skip over it. They might even like divert themselves from the story and say, like, well, that's not interesting, you would rather just want to like, if you have something like that, you would rather want to just paraphrase and say like Tom Davis, and also it's fewer words, so it's actually easier to read, said he will work harder and apply himself now, or something like that, or this semester. Isn't it easier to read? It's actually fewer words. It's about time, he said. So that's why it's better to paraphrase than it is more so. And that's essentially what a news story is. Essentially, it's like a kind of a paraphrasing of an interview, okay, than anything else. Okay, so then actually like direct quoting. I like to tell people that it's better to follow this process when you're actually like, especially when you're interviewing that sort of thing, and we deal with interviewing in these readings, is to basically when you're actually doing any kind of like interviewing is to um listen. You got to really like, sometimes a lot of times actually people when they actually do an interview, they don't even like have their reporter pad out. They just listen. They just want to try to understand first before they do anything. And then they start to basically write things down. So you listen and you internalize. Okay. Oops. Internalize. Okay, understand what's being said, and then oops. And then you write, but then you summarize. And that's really probably a good lesson for like any kind of like note taking, what you do in any of your classes or anything like that. I always draw this example. Back when I was a freshman at Rutgers, we had this student by the name of Francine, who's a friend of ours, and she wrote down everything that was said in Scott Hall 123 in psychology, every last thing that was said. And I have to admit, oops, I just missed class a few times. I was working hard on Targum, sorry. And she wrote down everything that was being said, and we got better grades than her. Did you ever notice that when you write down everything that's being said, you're not really quite listening to what's being said? You're just kind of doing it in a very robotic method. We would actually read her notes, and we got better grades than she did because she wasn't internalizing. She was just writing. Okay, so that's like a lesson basically in like interviewing and basically like taking down what you need to take down and in your notes and using and then taking that from that, extracting whatever you got from your notes and putting it into print. You basically take the summarized notes that basically work as your paraphrase, and then maybe that might say something quippy or colorful or something like that. And that's when you write down exactly what they say. Okay. You listen for that too. You almost got like two brains going on at the same time. Okay. So anyway, let's go to the actual chapters now. Okay. So this one actually deals with quotations and attribution. And I have actually like talked to you already about attribution, but I'll basically repeat it a little bit. But basically, when to use direct quotations. Reporters use direct quotations when their sources say something important or controversial or state their ideas in a colorful manner. I mean, there have been whole stories that have actually happened because of like weird things people have said. And actually, I meant to actually call this up too. Um, you know, you remember maybe a couple years ago when I'm sorry, I'm not trying to take political sides here. Remember when our former president made the statement about bleach and how maybe like disinfectant or whatever it was could actually like um could actually work as like something that could actually prevent COVID. Well, that's the kind of example right there where maybe like, that would work.
Supposing we hit the body with a tremendous,
Where basically you directly quote somebody because it's colorful and it's unusual and it's unique.
whether it's ultraviolet or just very powerful light. And I think you said that hasn't been checked, but you're going to test it. And then I said, supposing you brought the light inside the body, which you can do.
Maybe something like supposing they brought the light inside the body, something like that is like controversial, colorful, the whole thing, whatever you want to say, it's something that you can actually use in direct quotes. The paraphrasing would be something along the lines of, you want to introduce that direct quote is President Trump tried to explain why he feels that disinfectant could work in preventing COVID. Okay. So that's maybe like an instance where you would do that. Okay. But again, you kind of like try to be of like two brains when you're actually listening to somebody in an interview. You try to like maybe look for that like that thing you can use to kind of help humanize the story, like colorful. But you're also the main purpose when you do an interview is that you want to actually like take down what they say and summarize what they say and understand what they're saying, so that basically you have a story. You have your actual story and your narrative. Okay, and you use your own writing to do that. Okay. I am a big opponent of starting a story with a quote. I've had people do that over the years. And it's really out of context to start a story with a quote. Usually like a direct quote. A direct quote is actually kind of vague a lot. It has to be really kind of like an almost like maybe no higher really even like the first third of the story, unless it's a story about something somebody said. Then you do it. But basically, you want to avoid doing that. You want to have something that's your own writing at the top of the story that tells people what the story is about. Okay. This chapter goes into things like, a lot of places don't like having profanities in their stories, but I mean, if you have that in our stories, that's fine. Okay. Now attribution. Okay. Attribution is big. I've talked about that before again, but again, let's like talk about it again. It is important because basically it is the way to give the story credibility. Okay. But if you're paraphrasing, you should use attribution too. Okay. Again, like Tom Davis said, he will apply himself this semester. Okay. Even when it's little known facts or opinions, it should have some sort of attribution. Now, somebody actually asked me this question in my in-person class. How should you attribute? And somebody said, because I've come on some papers where I've come down on the word explained. Explained is an editorializing word. And you should really use said. Said is a neutral way of attributing information to a source. It's just said. It's the action that they took. But explained kind of indicates that maybe they explained it away. I always use the comparison. It's like a 20-year-old example. I know, here we go. I'm taking sides again. George Bush explained why we went into Iraq. It's almost like he did this, it's almost universally accepted that maybe that was a bad idea, I think. 20 years ago when he did that. And he explained what his reason was, and it was proved to be wrong, was that they found weapons of mass destruction there. Well, they didn't find weapons of mass destruction there. Okay. So when they were saying that he explained, he didn't explain. Okay. He just said it. He made the action of having it come out of his lips. Okay. But he didn't explain it away. Explaining means that he resolved the issue. He didn't do that. Okay. So that's why you really need to basically avoid that. You could use you could have variations on the word said to be something like he discussed how he did this, or he talked about how. Okay, that's an actual description of in the moving of the lips and words coming out, okay? And that's what the word said does, okay? So that's when you use attribution, and that's how you should use attribution. You probably saw that in a bunch of your papers, why I took that out. Any kind of corrections or anything, I do that. You should ask me if why did I do that? If you don't understand why I did that, okay? Indirect quotes essentially are essentially paraphrasing. Identifying sources. And actually talk about that in my in-person class, but I should have. I mean, basically in this class, we actually do identify sources, okay? I mean, it's not, we don't do these exercises, by the way, but we actually do, there's actually different ways of actually handling that. Let me go back to this. There's different, basically I want names in this class. We're not an investigative class, okay? Maybe we'll run into that once or twice and it's happened, okay? But we're not going to necessarily deal with topics I think that's going to make people run and hide. We're not going to put this into some sort of print or anything like that, okay? I used to kind of do that, but I don't do it anymore. But anyway, there's different ways of handling sources, okay? And basically what we do is we write, when we attribute sources, we write sources, basically on the record, what they call it, okay? With attribution, meaning that their name is identified and it's on the record. On the record means that they are going to be printed and they're willing to put their name on the record, okay? But there is actually an on the record where we don't use their name, okay? And that's an anonymous source, okay? And that's usually called, that's usually called without attribution, okay? Meaning that you didn't put their name there. You say a source said. Another one is another way of describing that is background, okay? All right. So basically, you might have a situation, and maybe it comes up in this class once or twice, but this is a very basic fundamentals class. I don't really get into this. I really just want people to learn how to write and write well and report well. That's all. Getting into this whole, let's go undercover and Broward Commons, that sort of thing. No. I just want you to be able to write and connect and be relatable to people, okay? But anyway, this is what you would do when you would want to do a source said, okay? You basically use anonymous source, a source close to so-and-so said, okay? All right. The other way of handling sources is off the record, and that's when you basically can't use their name at all, okay? Now, why is that even a thing, okay? Well, it's a thing largely because sometimes you'll be interviewing somebody and they'll say this is off the record, and you're like, oh crap, what do I do now, Or maybe they'll say it after, and actually legally, really, it's actually, I say legally, that's a technical term, but legally, off the record, it should be said at the beginning of before they say anything, right? But you want to don't want to. You're not going to be sued or anything like that, okay? But you may just burn your source. You may just source, but I just talk to you again if you use the information. Anyway, it's not like you're going to be thrown into jail. But off the record is actually a good tool to use because sometimes you get information you wouldn't otherwise get anywhere, and of course you can't print it from. But if it's sourced to that person who goes off the record, but what you can do is you can take that information and maybe go to somebody else and get that information on the record, okay? Maybe you get it without attribution, but you get that information off the record, you go somewhere else and confirm it. That's actually, there's politicians, major politicians who actually have off the record meetings with reporters and everything, just to kind of give them some sort of information, let them know what's going on and stuff like that. And then maybe down the road, they can confirm it elsewhere, okay? So that's basically direct quotes attribution. So there's different ways of actually getting that. And that's through the interview process. Okay. Different interview process. Okay. And there's those interview process. The one thing I just want to let you know about this chapter is that the one thing you want to do whenever you're doing kind of interviewing or any kind of information gathering, I should say, is you want to try to maintain control. Okay. Oftentimes that's taken away from you, especially now in this growing internet world. Because in the past, a long time ago, you used to just basically get information either face to face or on the phone. And that's actually the best way for a reporter to maintain control of the interview because you're the one in control of the questions and that sort of thing. Okay. And I mean, emailing is also another way. This talked about in this chapter. It's frowned upon by a lot of people. I don't really have a problem with it, but the only problem with that is that you lose the emotional context that maybe you would have gotten with a phone interview. Maybe things are said the wrong way, and when you just get an email, you don't necessarily understand the context of it. I actually think email interviewing is best when you get like data or something like that, because then you especially get numbers, things like that, long lists of information, stuff like that. You want to make sure the information is exact and true and correct. So, because then when they come back to you, especially like police information, things like that, when they come back to you and they say like, "Hey, dude, I didn't I didn't quite say it that way," you can say, "Well, yes, you did." Um, so yeah, you want to make sure that basically you have control over the interview. The way they take control over the interview away from you is when they put out a press release. And I actually meant to do this earlier. The Ahmaud Arbery case was an example of that. This was the case where the man was jogging through. Sorry if I can spell his name right. He was jogging through a neighborhood. He was a black man, and he was basically ended up in an incident, and he was killed. Okay. And it initially came out as a press release from the police department. And I'm sorry, I meant to actually come out with this. I think this is it right here. May 21st, 2020. No mention about actually what happened, which was basically like these racist people essentially eventually got convicted, like went after him because he was a black man. They thought he was stealing things in the neighborhood, and they went after him, and they followed him through the streets and all this stuff. The GBI arrested William Roddy Bryan, age 50, on charges of felony murder and contempt. Blah blah blah. These charges. Actually, this is actually. I'm sorry. This is actually something. Let me just say. It was basically like it basically reported a death, and it basically said that like he died, and there were people there, and that's all it said. Okay. I'm sorry, I'm doing this while I'm actually doing the actual. Actually, it might be down on the list. Update. Okay, let's see what we got here. Oh, here we go. Yes, the report circulating the video footage. That was the update. Here we go. Here it is. I'm sorry. He was okay. Greg Michaels. Let's see here. Okay. Anyway, basically they were actually asking for tips, this sort of thing. They were reviewing additional footage, but they had to update it because initially they didn't have that footage. Okay. It says here on February 23rd, 2020, Ahmaud Arbery was in blah 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 when both Gregory and Travis McMichael confronted Arbery with two firearms. During the encounter, Travis McMichael shot and killed Arbery. So this is the initial reporting on it from the police. It's being investigated, and that's pretty much all they said, and that's all people got from it, and that's all the newspapers reported. Okay, and that this is in the age of the press release. This is pretty much all we get. You know, and really, you've got to go beyond the press release and really start to question about what the hell is going on here. I mean, like, oh my God, this man was just shot. What happened there? And that's how the initial reporting went. But then as they updated, they found out that actually there was a video that was circulating, and the video showed actually what was going on. And that's why it's important to like go beyond the press release often and question. You'll see like in that I'm sorry, in the boy, what were they called? Worksheets that it showed you that basically information was given to you, but that's all the information was given to you. You would probably go beyond like in the art, in again giving a little hint away here in that one particular example on the worksheets involving attempted murder. You want to go beyond and basically find out exactly what was behind that. Okay. What was the reason for that? And we eventually found out in this, so it was essentially racism that was behind this. okay? And largely that was thanks because of the videotape that eventually came out of it, okay? So that was like one way, that videotape helped the reporters and everything take control back, from the original source, which was the press release, okay? The press release can work against you. It's good that actually things can be released to you, information makes things easier to write and that sort of thing, I have to admit. But on the other hand, there's always like maybe something beyond it, especially when you deal with these murder investigations that you have to really keep an eye out for, okay? And that's when they talk about interviewing here. You want to maintain the control of the interview. And one of the things to do is to actually obviously prepare. And one way to do that is if you know you're going into a situation, sometimes you have to write on the fly and that sort of thing, and you can't really do that. But to prepare for the interview, maybe like, investigate as much as possible on the internet, see what information is there about the person you're interviewing, maybe the background on the case or whatever. You want to know as much as possible so you can ask those who, what, where, why, when questions. We're going to deal with feature stories later on in the semester, but that's when basically more colorful stories, more environmental stories, easier to read stories. But now we're just kind of dealing with straight facts. So obviously you want to just do things like get facts, details, names, locations, the who, what, where, what's going on. Okay. Especially with these profile stories. Okay. Chronology, and you want to go macro to micro because maybe there's something about one of these things here that is actually more interesting than the other. And that's when you want to shift the interview direction because it starts off like almost like some sort of awkward job interview. That's when you want to shift and go into that more specific direction and then focus on that specific example. Okay. Relationships among people, organizations, blah, 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 context, perspective, things like that. Who, what, where, why, when. And feature deals with more things like environment, like what they're wearing and things like that. We'll deal with that later on in the semester. Okay. How many sources are enough? Now, look, for this first story we're doing, which is basically just interviewing a person. Okay. I just want one source. I don't want to go too deep into it. I just want to get you writing down first, really, mainly that you know how to write a story, that sort of thing. But in the later part of the semester, if we did this kind of story, and actually soon we're going to be doing a story like this, it's actually always best to get more than one source to a story. And actually for a profile story, especially, not for this one, but you really should get more than one source. Because think about it, is like one source really like the best information for a profile? I mean, think about it, it's biased, right? You're interviewing one person, that person. I mean, you don't necessarily want to go negative on a person. You want to get multiple perspectives. Maybe there's like things about that person that person doesn't even know about that it's good. You want to get, I like to say it's like multiple perspectives is good. One thing that's like becoming a big thing now in journalism is both siderism. And I think that it's always good to get both sides to a story, and that's still important in a lot of ways. But now we're seeing things like in politics where like things like, like the January 6th insurrection, where like I feel like there's almost like one side is really like kind of going way too much in the criminal direction. I won't say who, but so it's not necessarily like both sides when you're trying to basically like rationalize what people are doing and it ends up in death. So that's actually a thing that's actually more for media ethics. But I would like to say that getting multiple perspectives for a story provides the appropriate balance for a story that's necessary for a story. Okay. Making sure that you have good sources, that sort of thing is also very important for a story. Respectable sources, people who don't like make anti-Semitic remarks or things like that, quacks, jerks, assholes like that. Oops, I cursed. Is that bad for YouTube? You want to make sure you avoid sources like that on any level. Okay. Just people who are respected. Okay. People who are credible. Okay. I mean, you could do internet searches like that. Just Google their name or something like that, selecting a comfortable location is always good. You know, reluctant sources, we'll talk a little bit about that. Basically you're gonna have that. You want to like basically kind of, you don't want to like deceive a person, but you do want to try to make a person as comfortable as possible, even if they're like a person who, if it's a confrontational interview. Okay. Maybe you want to start off with questions that are maybe a little bit of softball kind of questions that are kind of easy and make them feel at ease or something like that. Okay. Let me just show you a couple examples. I showed you the Trump example. Now this is Now, this is example right here. Right? Trump was basically having a lot of press conferences when COVID was first starting. And, like, give the guy credit in a lot of ways, okay? Guy actually has a brain. He actually knew that actually this was helping him. His popularity went up when he was giving these press conferences, right? It was actually this press conference, actually, though, when he actually stopped giving them nearly as much. But they were helping them because of what the fallout from the bleach remarks and all that stuff. But it was actually something that helped him because he had control over the interview. He used to actually give interviews near a helicopter, so it was hard for like reporters to ask questions. He took control of the interview, and what you want to do is you want to try to get control back. You want to ask the tough questions. They may be awkward. They may make people feel embarrassed, that sort of thing. But you got to ask the questions, and maybe you try to. If you didn't have this opportunity with his interviews, his press conferences, but you want to like get control back as much as possible. Maybe pull the person aside. You try to pull maybe people who know him aside after the interview, that sort of thing. Follow up questions, follow up interviews, that sort of thing, and then you try to get control back because the press conference is the ultimate way of losing control of the interview. Okay. Here's an example like this. Matt Lauer, particularly crummy people. Matt Lauer is a crummy person, but I have to give him credit for this interview with Tom Cruise from a long time ago because he basically became a controversial interview. What happened was that Tom Cruise made some remarks. He's a Scientologist and he's against psychiatric medication or psychiatrists in general. And at the time, Brooke Shields, the actress, had made some statements that she needed antidepressants when she was having postpartum depression following giving birth. And Tom Cruise made some remarks in public that were controversial. So he was basically Tom Cruise was releasing a movie at the same time, but Matt Lauer uses as an opportunity to ask questions about that. But what he did was he actually kind of made things like a little smooth at the time. Um, Basically talking about the movie first, okay?
Wanting 1,000 tabloid headlines. He came here to our studio on Thursday for a freewheeling discussion. In the first part of our interview, we talked about his new love. I was thinking about it. On the one hand, it's got to be a little hard to see yourself everywhere splashed across the pages. Another aspect of this, though, is how many actors, 20-something years into a career, can generate this kind of interest still?
I just do what I do. I love making movies, and I feel privileged to be able to do that always. And it's something that I'm just living my life.
We'll talk about life in a second. Let's talk about the movie, though. Okay, War of the Worlds.
War of the Worlds,
I've always been fascinated by this whole concept, that we are not alone in a.
He did his research. He read the movie. He like asked the questions that make him feel good, that sort of thing. But then things got a little bit heated later on, which set things up. He eventually divorced Katie Holmes. Things got a little bit heated when he got into the subject of Brooke Shields.
Things I just say.
I don't mean that.
No, because
And I think that if you hadn't actually set him up to make him feel comfortable, it got to be a confrontational interview. But he might have, if he asked that question first, he probably would have walked off the stage. We've seen those kind of interviews, He probably would have walked off the stage right away, and there'd be nothing. Instead, he got actually answers and questions.
I don't want to compare things. I just say, no, because but what it is, it's that thing where you just in life when it just happens, man. It's just you meet
Not
someone.
quite there yet, but here we go. Let's go
to listen to you because clearly you've done the homework and you know the subject,
and you should, and you should do that also because just knowing people who are on Ritalin isn't enough. You should be a little bit more responsible in knowing.
I'm not prescribing Ritalin, Tom, and I'm not asking any. It's a little testy.
I gotta give Lauer credit there. He basically one thing you can't do when that goes on, you can't let the interviewee try to take control of the interview. You have to basically almost be a wall and basically just be able to take those questions even when they're being thrown back at you. Okay. Let them ask questions right back at you, but then ask the questions right back at them.
And you'll see that coming up in our next half hour. And the tone of the discussion took a turn.
I've never agreed with psychiatry, ever. Before I was a Scientologist, I never agreed with psychiatry. And then when I started studying the history of psychiatry, I started realizing more and more why I didn't agree with psychiatry. And as far as the Brooke Shields thing is, look, you got to understand, I really care about Brooke Shields. I think here's a wonderful and talented woman. And I want to see her do well. And I know that psychiatry is a pseudoscience.
But Tom, if she said that this particular thing helped her feel better, whether it was the antidepressant or going to a counselor or a psychiatrist, isn't that enough?
Matt, you have to understand this. Here we are today, where I talk out against drugs and psychiatric abuses of electric shocking people, okay, against their will, of drugging children with them not knowing the effects of these drugs. Do you know what Adderall is? Do you know Ritalin? Do you know now that Ritalin is a street drug? Do you understand that?
The difference is this was not against her will, though.
Matt,
But this wasn't against
asking you a
Brooke's will.
question. Matt, I'm asking you a question.
I understand there's abuse of all of these things.
No, you see, here's the problem. You don't know the history of psychiatry. I do.
Aren't there examples, and might not Brooke Shields be an example of someone who benefited?
So they kind of match you with the I know this and you don't, that sort of thing. Okay. I always said that this was like a great little like anecdote right here. Steven Spielberg just came out with this movie called The Fabelmans. It's about his life. It's about essentially it's a paraphrases his life, but basically it's about his mother and his father. I don't want to give too much away here. I think it was a very good movie. I don't know. I'm a Gen Xer, so I'm old. My daughter didn't like it too much. It's coming of age, boomer age, that sort of thing. But it's about his mother and father. His father was a scientist. His mother was a musician. And they could be too old. They were like 2 worlds apart. They ended up divorcing, I guess. But he grew up in an atmosphere where basically it was anti-Semitic. He was treated the way he was treated in California. And but he just drew on inspiration of his family to keep him going. His mother coming from essentially the entertainment world. That's where he probably get like and his interest in like basically becoming a movie actor and all that. A movie director and all this stuff, space and all that stuff. But the technical side came, the interest in space and all that stuff probably came from his father, who was a computer science guy, all that stuff. So basically it was this thing called, I forget what it was called, the name of the show, but the interviewer died. His name was James Lipton, but he asked great questions. And it's just an example of like, just being well researched and being and Steven Spielberg has done a bunch of interviews, but actually getting Steven Spielberg, and Steven Spielberg didn't really say much of substance here, but I thought it was actually something that was actually almost like a great quote he got out of him, and really like made Steven Spielberg feel vulnerable and that sort of thing, which you don't often see Steven Spielberg look like he's being vulnerable, right? But this is thanks to research.
Your father was a computer scientist. Your mother was a musician. When the spaceship lands, how do they communicate?
That's a very good question. I like that. You've answered the question.
They make music on their computers and they are able to speak to each other.
And you see, I'd love to say, I intended that and I realized that was my mother and father, but not until this moment.
I mean, Steven Spielberg, like really human, no canned answers. He's just like really like appreciative of that question. I thought it was great. Humble, humility, the whole thing. Okay. So that's essentially good interviewing. Okay. And when you interview your people, you want to like try to make them feel at ease. You want to do and that one way to do it is to do your research. You might get some confrontational, but you want to like be that wall. You want to like continue to try to make them feel at ease. You don't want to like necessarily like make them feel like they did anything wrong. Sometimes people get like pissed off during interviews. The way it goes. Sometimes like my in-person class gets a little tougher because they're interviewing people who like they don't know at all. They're actually interviewing other students in class. So I'm trying to make things a little bit easier for you guys. Interview people but sometimes you might even run into people they get a little personal, like your parents, you might interview them and they say like, why are you asking me about that? So I can see how that could happen. Okay. All right. So that's it for the lesson. I appreciate it. This will be posted on Monday. Thanks very much, everybody. And remember what you got to do. You got to rewrite. That's going to be due on Monday, the 13th, right? Yeah. Okay. For the, you're going to have a rewrite for the worksheets. That'll be due then. And then you have the I'm sorry, and then of course the rewrite for the the rewrite for the profile assignment. Oh boy, I forgot a big one, and I'm make sure that I'll make a note of this. I should have said this at the beginning of the tape. We're not done yet. We actually have another assignment to do, and let me actually go back to sharing the screen. And I'm sorry I forgot about this. And that actually is this. So now that we're actually talking about like getting multiple perspectives and that kind of thing for a story, we're actually going to return back to actually story writing after doing this worksheets. And what I want you guys to do, and I'll be posting this on Monday as well, is essentially one thing you want to do as a journalist is when you want to like come up with ideas and interview people, you might come up with other ideas for other stories. And you want to be like essentially a self-manager, somebody who actually can like think on their own. A lot of times they say like the best newsroom, back when we had like newsrooms and that sort of thing, we still do, is when you don't see anybody actually in the newsroom. Why? Because they're actually out getting stories and that sort of thing. So you have editors like it better, much better, when the actual reporter actually goes out and does his or her or their own work. Okay. And that's like the great thing about interviewing, when you get to know people and you do your studying and you're researching of people on the internet, you come up with ideas. And what I would do in person, which I'll be doing my in-person class, actually I'm going to ask everybody to come up with like a bunch of ideas for stories for Rutgers, that sort of thing. And I'm going to pick the best one and that sort of thing that comes out of that. And that'll be the next assignment for you guys. I'm going to do the same thing. Okay. I am going to post this. So basically what I want you to do is to come up with your own ideas. That means being independent and coming up with your own ideas. And these ideas from the will basically come from talking, interviewing people. Okay. And please come up with 5 story ideas or Rutgers related. Choose the best assignment. Okay, I will choose the best assignment idea from everybody's assignment ideas. Okay. And that will become the next assignment. Okay. One that I expect to have like multiple perspectives, multiple sources in it. And then whoever has that best assignment will get extra credit. How about that? Okay. So this is an extra credit assignment on top of being a new assignment. And this is actually going to be due on Thursday, February 9th. Okay. 8, 9, right. Yeah. So I want you guys to get these ideas in by Thursday. Okay. And this is actually a class participation exercise also, like that you do this and you get this done. Okay. People ask me, how do I do class participation with asynchronous? Well, this is another example of how you do it. Okay. And then like what I do is in a way of to help people get interviews, I actually have a discussion point to get interviews for that assignment idea. Okay. That we ultimately do. Okay. So basically, yeah, now look, again, the idea is got to be keep it simple, no major investigations. Like I'm going to go undercover at Broward Commons, keep it simple, it's got to be Rutgers related, really. I'm not sorry, it doesn't have to be Rutgers related, it can be anything really, but try to keep it maybe something like that. Okay. I always think that maybe reaction stories are really just the best stories to do. I'm actually trying to get you guys to do something you can do essentially in a week and a half or 2 weeks, that sort of thing. No major investigations or something like that. Maybe a reaction to something that's going on at Rutgers or whatever. We've done COVID related stories in the past. I mean, I hope we're kind of moving away from that. Anything, I don't know. Just come up with some like 5 ideas and on a Microsoft Word doc, and then put it, and then basically file it here. Okay, a file upload here. Okay, so that'll be posted on Monday as well. Okay, and then again, that'll be due on Thursday. Okay. All right. Well, thanks very much, guys, and let me know if you need any help.